This is an exploration and a practical guide for doing healing work through working with the Egyptian interpretation of the 36 Decan Spirits. I will confess first, I am a horrible astrologer. I pay astrologers to do astrology. You should get a local astrologer and pay them. That is what you should do. Support your local astrologer. But, and if you're interested in a deep astrological understanding of the Decans, I highly recommend 36 Faces by Austin Coppock. There's supposed to be a new version coming out eventually, maybe this year. Otherwise, you can sell a kidney and get the old one, whatever you prefer. But I'm not going to focus too much on the astrological elements this evening, beyond saying this is a collection of star spirits that became time spirits. So I began my engagement in 2017 with these spirits, working with a ritual that Gordon White from Rune Soup, and we were just saying Gordon's hiding behind me someplace up here. This is other side? Yeah. But if you're interested in the actual ritual process of how to engage with these spirits, I highly recommend going to Rune Soup and doing the ritual as Gordon describes. I'm not going to go into that particular ritual this evening because it's his work, and it's very meaningful, and I suggest you check it out. During that process, so I will say this, the ritual was a year of work. So every 10 days, splitting it up into 36, you would engage with the spirit and attempt to communicate with them. And through that process, they sort of communicated to me that they wanted me to write poetry about this. So I thought, great, I'll write some poems. It'll just be, sort of hymns of praise to these spirits as you go through the thing. And I had, this process involved very intense spirit contact. And it was some of the most intense spirit contact I'd had to date. And, there's the old saying that if you're always hearing yes, you're not talking to the spirits, you're just talking to yourself. In this case, I actually had a spirit that argued with me. And it came out very aggressively and was like, it's Thursois, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but came to me and said, it's a bone-setting spirit, right? That was its function in Egypt. You would... actually, let me backtrack slightly and explain how they used to do it. We'll come back to the spirit that yells at me. In Egypt, one of the things that would happen is if you were seeking healing, you may be approached by a priest, magician, along these lines, who would engrave the image of one of these spirits that was assigned to a certain part of the body onto a stone. And then they would place that on your body either as protection or healing for the illness or situation you were encountering. So Thursois was connected to bone setting. And when I encountered him, he very aggressively said, "Why haven't you talked with me in the past? Why didn't you get me to heal your big toe?" I had a very horrible break of a big toe during a karate tournament when I was a kid. Foot went in and sideways, that's all you really need to know. And it had to be set, right? It had to be pulled out and surgery and everything else. And I was like, well, I didn't know you when I was 18. I appreciate the interest. And I said before these were time spirits. Thursois said, why should that matter? Why should it matter that it was in the past? Now, a really smart magician at this point would have gone and done time magic to heal their own toe. I did not. I'm not that clever. But what did happen... Go on, it's fine. What did happen was that the next day I was contacted by a friend of mine. And she was in complete tears because she had broken her toe. You can choose to believe a woman who's had these kind of injuries before, that she had actually injured herself, and that an accelerated process of healing happened when she asked for it from the spirit. Or you can presume a doctor was telling her she's wrong, and the doctor is right about her making this all up. I very much prefer to choose believing her about her experience and understanding what had happened there. So it became clear to me that these were not just hymns of praise to the spirits. This was actually a way of healing that was being taught to me to share with other people. So I began then writing the poems in talismanic timing. Because one of the other things is in the past, you would prepare this in the time of the Decan. You would bring it to the, it would be activated in that way in the temple. So all the poems were written and edited in their redrafting in the structure of the time frame of the Decan itself. All the drawings that accompany it by my dear friend Brennan Reese these are done in talismanic timing as well. Now, we did cut one deal. We were allowed to edit at the end for publishing's sake however we could. But all the initial work was done in talismanic timing. Which means what we did, in effect, was create a system where you have these are all woodcuts. You have an engraved object made in the timing that can be distributed to people and given for the purposes of healing. I want to clarify something quickly about how I think magical healing works, and then I want to do some magical healing for you all by reading the poems. And that's actually part of what I want to offer this evening. Yes, I'm excited if you like the poems. I hope they're really fun poems to listen to. I have a poet's vanity about this sort of thing. But the purpose of these is to offer healing. And I hope that as we go through this tonight, that is what is offered to you as well. So the process of healing, I think Ramsey Dukes, has described it best, that placebo is our politically correct term for magical healing. That if you use the power, the imaginal power, to heal someone, that is something we should be taking advantage of. I don't believe that we should be ignoring contemporary medicine, although I do think it has some problems that could use some updating. But I think we are missing a component that would be present if we had carried this tradition on correctly. My son has asthma, and when he was small, he had several hospitalizations, and I became obsessed with the idea of, if this was 100 years ago, what would I have done? And I began asking myself that question a lot. And the answer is, 100 years ago, he would have been in some serious problems, because at the time, they were using talk therapy to deal with asthma, to get rid of your anxieties. That's what's causing it. However, Galen understood that it was actually muscular spasms and would have treated it with an acetylcholine compound that we would use today. The difference in Pergamum and today is shelf life and transportation. So they would have created a chemical compound from this plant. They would have put it into water. They would have steamed it. You would have inhaled it through a clay tube, and that would have dealt with your asthma. Not that different from an inhaler, right? Which is how it's used today. The other intervention would have been ephedra, which Pliny the Elder talks about, putting in red wine. That's ephedrine, that's adrenaline shots. That's another way we intervene with asthma today. The physicians in Alexandria were doing brain surgery. They were delineating between the cerebrum and the cerebellum, and they were able to look at the different pieces of the eye through vivisection. They also would send you to an Asclepion and have you do magic in order to help your healing process. Exactly. And they do both, right? This is the piece that to me fell out of the process, is that we forgot in our enlightenment period, we forgot the necessity of this kind of healing and the necessity of spirits to what we're doing. So the last story I'll tell about healing that's happened, and there are more stories about this. I've been using this method with friends basically since we started developing it. But I stick to the stories that are personal because they happen to me and I think that's mine to share. My grandfather had bladder cancer as he was approaching the end. And he also had dementia. And the doctors were very concerned because they were pointing out to my father, who was caretaking him at the time, that the dementia might keep him from remembering why he was experiencing pain. So he would just be in a constant state of pain with no way out. And my father called me, was very upset about this, and we were talking it out. And so I had, at the time, Brennan hadn't finished The Spirit That Deals with the Bladder, but it was in the timing. And I said, can you please finish it? And I had his rough sketch, I had that sent to my dad, and the poem I had written. And my father, who's a Baptist minister, and I think would most likely just describe this as a concentrated form of prayer, which is another legitimate interpretation in my opinion, read the poem and showed my grandfather the image. He did not experience pain from the bladder cancer the entire time until he passed. Sometimes healing is a miraculous broken bone recovery, Sometimes it is not feeling pain as you approach the end of life. I don't presume to tell people or the spirits what healing looks like, but both of those are important. You know, sometimes you see these studies on placebo where they're like, oh, 20% lift in outcome. 20% lift in outcome is crazy. Like, if you could cut a cold short by 20%, that would be amazing, right? Like, this is the kind of stuff that's at our disposal that we're not taking advantage of, and that I believe firmly the spirits want to share with us. Right? And this book is my attempt to do that. We'll have a little question at the end if people have any questions about that, but I thought now maybe I would just get into the poems and share with you a little bit of what's going on. I wanted to start with Aquarius 1, since that's where we are. So in the construction of the poems, I wanted to just point out briefly, so the way they're named for, there are multiple names for the Decan Spirits. You know, for instance, on this one, you see the black dog wrapped up in the mummy wrap. It's named Thro, but also Ularis, right? So we've included both names from the different source texts, and then the part of the body that it represents or deals with. So in this case, Aquarius 1, Ularis, Shins. So that'll be the title of the. Oh, I should say one last thing before I start. I'm sorry. These poems are not what you might think of as traditional magical spells. They're not intended to be like, and now Ularis, heal my shins. You know, that's not how they function. What poetry, I think, does something different, which is it invites you into the place where you can meet the spirit. I'm not affecting this healing on you by doing a spell and getting a thing. What I'm saying is I'm introducing you to a spirit that does this kind of healing. And you're welcome to meet them and do whatever you will or don't will with that particular spirit. But I'm trying to create an introduction and a meeting ground. So these poems are more personal in that they reflect the emotional state I was in order to access the spirit, right? So I'm inviting you to come and dance with me in that space rather than performing a spell. So in terms of practice, I recommend this sort of contemplation attitude with it. So Aquarius 1, Ularis, Shins. In remembrance of frosted beech forests, wild ginger yellow eyes, just beyond the fire, smoking meat, an offering in no man's land. In remembrance of the long testing of the herd, sharp copper, proof of weakness from each, their chosen part to each, the rightful share, custom shaping even the body into something new. In remembrance of this, I take the wet tennis ball and I throw it. Dog spirits being dog spirits. They like what dogs like. As we put the poems together, it became clear that some other spirits wanted to be in this as well, and I did some divination on it, and the 36 said, yep, sure, bring them along. So the four royal stars and their angelic components are in the poem, and in the book, and not in the deck. So we made a deck to accompany this. Actually, Carl, do you mind passing me that? Or no, it's fine. Yeah, I'll just hold it up. So the deck that accompanies is actually a double deck. It's 72 cards, one dark, one light. The idea is that you could use these talismanically to give them to people. So if you have a friend who's sick with something, you can give that to a person. And it also reads as an oracle deck for communication with the spirits. It's just the 36, okay? But the angels wanted to protect the book. That was their connection. So they're guardian spirits for the book itself. But they have some nice things to say too. So Fomalhaut, Gabriel. As he stared into Balakili Gol, the reflecting pool of Adagartis, where the sacred fish swim among the stars each night, and our stars reflecting to each other in one constellated net for beauty. The angel Gabriel realized something I already knew 6,000 years later, seeing my face in the warm brown earth and green glass-trapped sunlight of my beloved's eyes. You shall have no other gods before love. and the longing you feel to press your heart into their heart and admit you would dive into a wild sea to touch them again for an instant is the only gospel worth living for. Taurus 2, Sarnatois, tonsils, and tongue. In moonlight, in a flock of apple blossoms, of red clay she made her Adam, her first, her only. Petals stuck to his curling beard. "Look at you, old man," she said. In moonlight with her hands she made him, with her spit and breath, with laughter and sweat along his shoulders. "Too big," her sisters said. "His teeth are like boulders." "Too big," her mother said. "You'll never feed him." "Too big," said her most and least favorite aunts. "How will you keep him?" But he woke in rain and she shushed him. She traced his name on his ribs with dittany, milk, and honey. He walked, a head taller than the trees, and carried her, and asked questions. "What is that serpent?" "The long river." "How long have you been here?" "Always, and a day." "Why did you make me?" "To see the stars in your eyes. Look up, sweetie." Then he would sigh, the night air rushing through his chest like an unseen ocean, and at last she would sleep. Cancer 2, Soma calmais, lungs. Do you dare linger with me the night? Bear the waiting, fingertip to lip. Let silence, like a walled garden, keep absent within reach. Hopes and thrum deep within our edging crepe myrtle skin. Desire to abandon all, escape to my arms. Do you dare come gliding, great blue, biting thunder in its wake, to the wonder of a mirrored lake that holds tight but never takes the stars? Libra 2, Chusthesis, urethra, bladder, and urinary tract. As horsehair catches catgut strings, aluminum rings with silt rock scrape. Echoes, tuning with marsh wrens, escape the shore into the quiet flow of lake skimming below the John boat's skin. Like waltzing heels float over sprung floor. Wind feels its way over chest waders, blunted, just as oxy shunted all to dull distance. Touch we ever this existence? Full disclosure, I so much hope it's so. That part of me goes with your ashes, stashed among the fingerings and phrasings, lingering in the dust of you, into the water, trussed with gull song, and this day's sun comes so long away for one final kiss. Sagittarius 2, Thursois, bones. Reduction, the bone setter's art, to guide back into place. How lovely to think, with a well-placed blow and twist, all the pins will tumble into place. That hands can move like tugboats through a deep fog, shepherding strays back into the channel by feel and true memory of the curve of an embankment, by soundings and secrets. How lovely, how absurd this spectrum of touch, this patient violence. 3 nails shivering in 2 beams frame a scaffold where what was broken may yet knit. A carpenter's eye knows. This house has good bones. There's years in her yet. I think I will read 2 more. Does that give us about the right time? This is one of my favorite illustrations that Brennan did for Leo 1. Actually, I'm going to cheat. We're going to do, well, I'll tell you that later. Leo 1, Zolioas, heart. When the lion-headed serpent curls around the ash tree, groaning like a galleon in a gale, my son, it is already too late. Cultivate a fencer's hate long before haughty eyes, the spine held straight, so the snake will know you wait, awake, not to flinch but snap, relaxed, at home in the instant of death. Show only then your courage, your heart's lion, blazoned on every pore, teeth bared, baleful roar erupting in each breath. Do not forget who you are. One who speaks the divine name, who kindles stars in your dreams. O my son, then and only then, when it sees you stand, a hunter, will it kneel. Cancer 1, Sothier, sides of the trunk. Against opinion, the world does not end in fire or ice, though the sun is swaddled by a great serpent, stowed in her soft mouth, and carried safe through the void gate of night. There is only one, after all, one light, one garden, one bright-eyed peacock angel, one pharaoh with many fames bound wire tight to the stars serving the one same people. It has a name, this spiral, this egg. Not first, nor lust, nor chaos, nor mist, nor fog, but trust. Only trust that nothing is missed, that future children know us already, as we carry them wrapped within our hearts. Thank you. To know.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
100 years ago in this country, they would cure asthma by hitting the 5th vertebrae with a rubber hammer.
Oh.
At regular intervals.
Apparently in the United States they had missed that and were still stuck with Freud. So it's an interesting technique.
They also do it in Thailand too.
Yeah. There might be something. I have more trust in the hammer than I do.
Well, it's a rubber hammer. It just
yeah.
Vibration.
Yeah. From the spine.
So, what's the procedure for self-healing? To read a poem?
So I think the way I have 2 suggestions there. One is that I suggest you come up with whatever method suits you. To be honest, that is the annoying and slightly deeper answer. That like, if you are engaging with these spirits and it feels real to you, then you are much better off than taking something I tell you now. The method I have used in the past with people is to contemplate the image and to read the poem. Either usually aloud, I think is best, but not required. And then to sort of sit in that space and let whatever dream, spirit, journey, encounter happens come to you in that place. So that is what I recommend in terms of doing it. And it's one reason that we sort of insisted that the images are present in both the deck and in the book, is that I do think that the contemplation of the image helps. But there's something too about words being spoken into being that's important there as well. The deck actually has little bits of the poems, erasures from the poems put onto the cards, so it's Oracle speaks in that sense, right? So, but yes, that's the procedure I recommend. However, I have had people just take again, like I say, take the card, give it to a friend. The friend sort of looked at it and was like, great, and then saw an improvement. So, again, whatever works for you, works for you. And I don't want to spend too much time in the introduction of the book. I intentionally avoid creating a hard method for reading the cards or for doing the stuff, because I think people should engage with it and be led by that communication. So, yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
Firstly, that's a fabulous shirt.
Thank you.
I love it. Very interesting. You're using Western signs of the zodiac, but
Yes.
what about the Dendra zodiac? You didn't relate to that? Or?
No. So the way there are a couple books. The sacred text of Hermes to Asclepius was the main text that I was drawing from, and so I kept the relationships that I found in there as a respect to the tradition. And then we talked at the beginning that these were star spirits that became time spirits. In my understanding of that text, there was originally a linking with specific stars, but then as precession happened, and Egypt's long enough that it can have precession happen and have to come up with a solution, so which is amazing. They moved them to time of the year, right? So that when these hit in the calendar, rather than just whenever the star hit during that time period. So they sort of exist both below and above the stars, if you take a sort of,
It's a dimension.
Right,
isn't it?
exactly. And so it allows for a really interesting connection to astrological magic, in the sense that, like, you're not as bound by the planets, you're not as bound by the locations of the stars, you are dealing with time directly. And so that has its own limitations as well, but that's what's happening with them, or what they represent, in my understanding. But the reason for the associations was taking it largely from the sacred book of Hermes to Asclepius.
You seem very well informed.
I do seem that way.
Yeah. No, it's a compliment.
No, I know. I'm just making a joke.
No.
No, sorry, what did you say? I introduced you to make a joke, which is bad. If we play chess, and I was like, that's fine, we'll just do that. So I would just try to find the best translations I could, and then work from there. I'd read plenty before, and then this text I encountered through, again, Gordon was sort of helping us navigate some of the research, so that part. And then I read 36 Faces, and I began looking through the source list that Austin uses as well, and so I would go back and try to read any translations I could find of the source material. This is actually the method I think is best for research, is follow the trail, like that adventure trail of, oh, this author I like read these 3 books. Now I'm going to go read those 3 books and see where they take me. And before long, you've read 50 books, and you have a decent understanding of a topic. But I'm not an expert in any of those in particular.
Well, you seem well informed. If you have a business card or a website,
I do have a website,
I'm not
actually.
going to be able to remember everybody
Sure.
that you cited.
Yeah. The references are in the book. Like any good poet, I start with a 30-page intro and make sure to mark all my references. But I'm at wilkinsbrian.com if you ever want to reach out to me directly.
Sorry to mention Treadwell's, and I won't say anything else in case people are trying to get a word in.
That's all right.
But they had a very, well, not everyone said it's all right, but thank you. Treadwell's had a very interesting presentation on occult poetry and
Oh, interesting.
esoteric poetry, and I've started doing that.
I
don't
think
think I'll ever be famous like you, but I'm enough for me. So.
no. I would love if people did more work with poetry and the occult. I mean, it is literally the tradition. It is what we're talking about. Whether you're talking about Celtic work or Egyptian work, or poetry is occult. It is magical. I have an MFA from a traditional academic poetry system, and my big objection is that people are treating poetry like it's not magical. They're pretending that you can that the act of conjuring images into space with words is somehow not magic, is ridiculous to me. And so I think we need to, people who understand spirits, who understand magic, and understand this stuff need to be more in the forefront of saying, you need to treat poetry seriously. You need to actually invest in this thing that's so present for all of us that we do from childhood. You know, you can hear children make up rhymes to heal their hurts as they're in, you know, parks playing. Like this is, and everyone has the right to poetry. If you understand language, it is yours. Like, you know, good, bad, you know, it changes with fashion, right? But you have the right to do poems and should be doing them. Sorry. Any other questions?
Okay.
Yeah.
How far into the process did you start writing poems? Were the poems part of your engagement with the spirits from the very beginning?
So the initial, because what happened is, so 2017, doing the ritual at first, I didn't write poems all the way at the beginning. So the year of doing the poems, I actually went back and did a whole other year of the, so there's actually the ritual year, the writing year, the editing year, and then the producing year. So like it actually, it's a big process. But it was about 2 months in that it became clear to me that the spirits wanted poetry written. And then, you know, that, because I started in, so the Egyptian year started Cancer 1. That's when this starts.
Rising of Soctus. Yeah.
Exactly. And I missed that, and so I started at Cancer 2. So the book starts at Cancer 2 because that's when I started. So it was somewhere November-y that I began writing some initial poems about it. It was a wild experience. It's just one of those things of like encountering spirits that wish to work with you, but also are real, is a very strange thing I don't think people talk about enough, that you have whole conversations. You understand that this is another entity that isn't you. Some of them tried to scare me. Some of them were very interested in me. Some of them could care less. And then a couple of them wanted some poems. So, you know, it sort of came out of that relationship more than anything else.
Is there a spirit for the mind?
No, these are very physical in that sense. Well, you know, where does the body stop? Where is the mind? You know, like now we're into deep territory here that will keep us all night. But their application is through the body. Let's put it that way. I would argue, however, that this is very much a circle. Like, so that I don't believe that my mind stops in my skull, right? You know, even in a sort of materialist sense, my mind doesn't stop at my skull. Every sunlight that bounces off a tree affects my mind, right? So I think that understanding is kind of built into it, that a good place for healing, a good place for regulation is in the body, right? But I don't think that it's limited that way. So for instance, if you were, actually, you know, I was talking to Callahan, who does Saturn Box, the podcast, and she had read some of the poems and kept being drawn to certain ones, and she was like, I don't know why I'm being drawn to these poems. Like, I don't know, I don't have a particular injury or whatever. As we talked about it, she realized that she was releasing emotional trauma that was connected to that she located in her body in those places. So then the question is, where is the mind then, right? So like if you can release an emotional difficulty that can improve your overall health, but also fixes the body, but also, you know, it all plays together. So that's how I would locate the question of does it address the mind? Yes, but through the medium of the body.
To me, everything you've mentioned, like you mentioned the Asclepian as well,
Right.
and then you mentioned it's like outside time
Sure,
as well.
a little bit, yep.
So predominantly because you reference Pliny, Asclepius, for example,
Right.
all the spirits, the Ptolemaic astrology,
Sure.
Ptolemaic ancient Egyptian as opposed to pre-Ptolemaic Egyptian then.
So no, it's a good question. So the spirits are the books we have about them, and the reference material I'm doing is connected to the sort of Hellenistic period, right? Like that's the sort of framework from which but they're referencing earlier books and they're referencing earlier material. So my understanding is that the spirits are actually very, very old in Egyptian practice, but this particular phylactery creation, you know, gemstone carving, which has a lot of similarities, some of the Gnostic work and some of that stuff, probably developed out of that time period, and that's where I'm locating the practice. But like many things, I suspect they're much older, and the interaction with them is much older.
You know, in my travels, because I lived in the Middle East, I actually have an astrolabe, and I can read and write Arabic.
Right.
So I'm not that good at it, but
My Arabic professor also complained and would prefer to play chess with me. So
But I'm very, I'm very interested in like Ibn Biruni, Mashallah,
Right.
all these. So I'm very interested in direct translation from the Arabic stars into English sometimes, because I'm not dismissing what the ancient Egyptians offered us at all from the Ptolemaic period, because
Sure.
there's the benefits, but I think I'm more drawn to that. But I will certainly buy your book, and
Thank
the
you.
Decans I'm interested in.
I will say, and for that, I really do recommend Austin's book. There are connections to the way the Decans are represented in Arabic traditions and the way they're represented in Greek, Greco-Egyptian, and so on. Like, he sort of has a nice little table that lays all that out. So, but yeah, I think there's really exciting translations being done right now of the Arabic. And I think we're going to get a lot of really good material out of that hasn't been accessible to people who don't speak the language.
Benjamin Dykes has done a lot
Right.
of work, but he uses Latin, so things have been translated from the Arabic into Latin and English.
So I know there's some new stuff coming out that's direct. So I'm keep your eyes. I can't remember exactly which foundations are working on it, but there's some new stuff coming out. So I think we're going to learn a lot.
And I think with that, I think we'll give it a round of applause.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming out.